My name is Eric Wright. I'm the education specialist for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, and I just would like to thank everybody once again for coming out tonight and joining us for this fantastic presentation. Before we get started, would just like to remind everybody of a couple things. First of all, if you do have any questions for our presenter tonight, you can submit those through the chat function on Zoom. And if you could submit those directly to Michael Olson, that would be fantastic. He's putting together a PowerPoint of all the questions to be featured at the end of the presentation. And also, we would just like to thank the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support in providing all this free programming that we are allowed to do while we are on this lockdown. Not just our mess nights, but also our curator conversations, our movie discussions, our trivia nights. We have a lot of events going on virtually every single month. So if you are interested in any other event that the Wisconsin Veterans Museum is doing, you can always find that information on our website, wizvetsmuseum.com. And just remember that all those free events are brought to you by the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation, and specifically their executive director, Ms. Jennifer Carlson. So we'd just like to thank them for their continued support. For Mess Night tonight, we are featuring Mr. Adam Holton. Adam graduated from the United States Naval Academy, and from there he served 6 years in the United States Marine Corps as an infantry officer. He spent 3 years at Camp Pendleton in California with the 1st Marine Division, and then 3 more years at Quantico, Virginia as a leadership and tactics instructor. After leaving the Marine Corps, Adam became a high school basketball coach and teacher in Charlottesville, Virginia, and in 2000 he joined GE Medical Systems as a 6 Sigma Black Belt. After leaving GE in 2003, he joined Bank One JP Morgan Chase as the manager of executive education. And in 2004, he deployed with his Marine Corps Reserve Infantry Battalion as company commander to Lutifiyah, Iraq, which is about 20 miles south of Baghdad, as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He is writing a book about those who he served with, and we are looking forward to reading that. And in February of 2019, he became the Chief Human Resource Officer for New Motion, an organization that's dedicated to improving the lives of people with disabilities. He lives with his wife and 3 children in Nolensville, Tennessee, and he's also the chairman of the board of Sierra Delta, an organization dedicated to pairing service dogs with military veterans who have suffered disabilities and have emotional needs. We welcome Adam tonight as he speaks about combat and trust, what 186 Marine and Corpsmen learned together. So if you can all join me in welcoming Mr. Adam Holton. Adam, the floor is yours, sir.
Eric, thank you very much for that introduction. I'd like to say good evening to everybody, and I'd also like to start by thanking the Wisconsin Veterans Museum for having me here tonight. Before I begin, I'd like to just take a minute to acknowledge those that are on the session tonight and on this Zoom call. I'm sure we have a number of veterans and their families on this call and on this presentation. And I'd like to say thank you to each one of you for the service that you've given our great country. I'd also guess that we probably have some of the members of Golf Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Marine Regiment. You know, to me, the finest group of people that I've ever had the opportunity to be around, and their families. And I want to thank them for being a part of this tonight. I want to thank them for their continued excellence, their guidance over the years, and quite honestly, their brotherhood. It has meant more to me than I can ever convey to each of them. So thank you for being here tonight. And to everyone, I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in. You know, I'm really looking forward to this discussion and telling you the story of Golf Company and giving you an inside look into the experiences that I had with this incredible group of individuals. And look, my goal tonight is pretty simple. I want to use the example of Golf Company to really give you an understanding of some lessons that I've learned over the years about trust. I want to talk about one of the social contracts that I think is really important in our country today. And then I want to end by challenging all of us. I'm going to give a bit of a real-time challenge to all of us. And like Eric said, we will take questions at the end. So when I'm done, we'll have some time for those as well. Now, before I tell you about Golf Company, let me tell you just a little bit more about myself. Obviously, Eric, gave the intro and a little bit of my bio, but I wanted to share that that I was actually born in Milwaukee. So Milwaukee's home for me. I'm a Green Bay Packer fan for life, as every self-respecting person should be. I remember growing up just hating the cities of Boston and Philadelphia, because every year in the 80s, the Celtics and the 76ers would beat the Bucks in the playoffs, so we never quite got to the finals. And I also remember some of my earliest memories were my parents taking me and my siblings out of school. And in the 70s, we would go follow Marquette around Marquette basketball during March Madness, wherever they played in the country. This was sort of just after the national championship year, but when they were really, really good at playing at a very, very high level. And that was a ton of fun. It also accounts for every once in a while when we'll come across one of my old 3rd or 4th grade report cards, and I have like 15 absences in a year on there. That was the reason why I was always sort of was surprised as to why that was, until I remembered the fact that we did that as a kid. So for me, Wisconsin really is home. As Eric shared, from 93 to 99, I was on active duty in the Marine Corps. So my first 3 years was out in Camp Pendleton in the 1st Marine Division. And my second 3 years was as a tactics and leadership instructor at the basic school, teaching second lieutenants how to be second lieutenants. Had a great time on active duty. And in 1999, I got out because I wanted to coach high school basketball. A few years later, I found myself in Chicago. And this would have been circa 2003. And, at that time, I'm sure everyone on this call would remember where we were as a country. We were in Afghanistan, and we were preparing to go to Iraq. And I had a feeling that, a lot of, I think, veterans at that time had that same feeling and acted upon it. But I had a feeling that I just had not yet given enough. I had not yet done enough. And living in Chicago, there was an infantry reserve battalion in the Marine Corps that was right there, headquartered out of the north side of the city. And I went and joined back into the reserves. I remember the day that I met with the battalion commander at the headquarters, and he gave me 2 choices in terms of how my assignment would be. I could join the S3 shop and be in sort of operations and planning, or I could go join one of the line companies that just happened to be in Madison, Wisconsin. I about ran to Golf Company in Madison, Wisconsin. It was a pretty easy choice. And I would say ever since then, it was one of the best choices that I've ever made in my life, given sort of the experiences that I had with Golf Company. So I'd like to share a little bit about who Golf Company is. This picture here on this slide is a picture in June 8th of 2004, when Golf Company left Madison. This was our flyaway, to go to Camp Pendleton, California, to train for 3 months prior to deploying to Iraq as a part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. In the months prior to then, we had sort of gone back and forth as to whether we would potentially deploy to Afghanistan or if we were going to deploy to Iraq. And the word came down in sort of early 2004 that Iraq was going to be it. A few things about Golf Company. So again, it was a reserve infantry company headquartered out of Madison. We had 186 Marines and sailors, Marine and corpsmen in the company. Most all of them were from Wisconsin. 171 of our guys was from the state of Wisconsin. We had 6 sets of brothers in the company. We had individuals who grew up competing against each other in high school sports, who knew each other at a very different level. That'll come back here in a few minutes. We just had guys that had grown up again, sort of knowing each other. So when they joined the Marine Corps and when they joined Golf Company, the unit that I joined, it was from the get-go, you could see the tight-knit organization that it was. When I joined Golf Company, and this would have been in August of 2003, it was my first experience with a reserve unit. And I got to admit that having served on active duty prior to that, I probably had bought into many of the negative stereotypes that exists in the fleet about the reserves. And what was really interesting is that when I joined Golf Company, I saw everything to be just the opposite of what I expected. You know, in every way that makes, every important way that makes a Marine, what I saw from Golf Company met or exceeded the standards of what I had seen on active duty. When you talk about the esprit de corps, when you talk about aggressiveness, when you talk about initiative, and yes, even when you talk about the confidence that I think is part and parcel in every Marine, that was there in droves relative to what I saw when I first joined Golf Company. And then beyond that, and this is the really cool thing about reserve units, there was a set of experiential skills that I never saw on active duty that would come to be really important in our time together over in Iraq. When you look at the unit that I was a part of, we had multiple law enforcement officers, we had firefighters, we had EMTs, we had individuals who were carpenters and plumbers. We had Marines who owned their own business, entrepreneurs. We had individuals that had a set of life experiences that you would see nowhere else. And again, that would come to great fruition when we did deploy, in terms of just the life skills and the perspective that our guys were able to bring into every situation. I loved every minute of my time on active duty, and the units that I were a part of were special. But what I saw in Golf Company was something that was unmatched in terms of my experiences up to that point and since then. So again, we flew out to California in early June of 2004. We were going to Camp Pendleton. Coincidentally, we ended up in Camp Horno in Pendleton, which just turned out to be the part of Camp Pendleton that I had deployed from almost 10 years prior as a part of 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, when I deployed and did a Westpac tour in 1994 and 95. So it was sort of like a coming home, a lot of great memories at Horno, getting ready for that deployment. And then 10 years later, getting ready for the deployment to go over to Iraq. Over the next several months, our company really got into the business of honing our skills to get ready for what we would see in Iraq. We were getting a lot of intel at the time in terms of sort of what we could expect. Our mission changed multiple times prior to getting over there in terms of what we were actually going to be doing. It settled down to be, and we found out a couple of months prior to actually leaving stateside, that we would go and be in an area of operations a little bit south of Baghdad in what now and then is referred to as the Triangle of Death. We were going to be trained throughout that summer for security and stability operations. So SASO was a term that was used a lot at that time. It was sort of a precursor to the COIN or counterinsurgency strategy that I think became very popular sort of as the Iraq conflict continued. But we were trained throughout that summer in a lot of new tactics and techniques for what we were going to be facing when we got over into Iraq. So when we talk about what we would actually go and face, on this slide, I've got, this was pulled out of an article from the Washington Post, both the sort of map and the picture in mid, let's say, 2004, before we got there. We knew that we were going to be going into a very different Iraq than what we had originally seen when coalition forces went in 2003. So again, I think probably most everybody on the call tonight would have some working knowledge of, sort of the first push into Iraq. We were able to achieve our military objectives very quickly with a lot of great work by the coalition forces. And then it really started to, do the work of how do you help to create a stable society after what happened in Iraq. Several months later, as you started to get into early 2004, there were a couple of events that really started to show that things were changing. I think it was in February, March of 2004, when 4 Blackwater contractors were killed in Fallujah. Their bodies were mutilated. They were sort of dragged all across the city, and they were actually their bodies were hung over the Euphrates River. That made the news, obviously, in a very, very big way, and it emboldened the burgeoning, let's say, insurgency in Iraq. Later that month, in a prison called Abu Ghraib, there was the scandal around sort of the treatment of prisoners that came to light in the news. And, obviously, a number of news cycles ran with that story. And that was another, let's say, inflection point that, I think many military leaders after the fact would look back at and say, that was a bit of another turning point in terms of emboldening the insurgency within Iraq in terms of what it would end up being. And it was, clearly a PR nightmare. So the area of operations that we knew we were going to be going to was centered around this city of Mahmudiyah. You can see on the schematic here, Lutifiyah, and what is termed in this map as Lutifiyah was actually Lutifiyah, were the sort of big cities that would exist within our area of operations. We knew we would be going into country with a traditional security mission. We knew that the unit that was there before us, it was a Marine unit, was in terms of what they were seeing was a much heightened sense of number of attacks and the security. And we, again, knew that our mission was going to be to go into this large area of operations to create a secure area that would lay the foundation for a stable Iraq for the future in terms of our part of the country. Other pieces about our area of operations. So, and this is where I think understanding the history and the demographic makeup of Iraq, I think, is really important. So when you think about Iraq, there are many ethnicities and there are many tribes, if you will, that sort of consist within Iraq. 3 of the bigger ones is the Kurds were off to the far north of the country. And then the rest of the country was Sunni and Shia. The Sunnis, not exclusively, but primarily lived in and around Iraq and sort of the northern half or the mid half of the country. and the Shia were more to the southern side of the country. What was really interesting, telling, and important to understand about the area of operations that Golf Company would go to is that we were going to be in an area of operations that was almost 50% Sunni and 50% Shia. And while I think there was a lot of focus during the time that we were in Iraq and during the conflict of the violence and the insurgency and what the insurgency tried to do to coalition forces, I'm here to tell you that the violence between Sunni and Shia on each other was worse. And so we knew, as a sort of a matter of understanding, we knew that we were going to see a lot of the following. One of the things that, especially early on in our time in Iraq, that unfortunately we saw a fair amount of was Sunnis would set up temporary vehicle checkpoints somewhere in the area of operation on a road. They'd set it up. They'd take 15 minutes. They'd stop people in their cars. They'd pull them out. And if they determined that those people were Shia, they'd kill them and they'd leave their bodies on the side of the road, and vice versa. And that was a regular occurrence in the area of operations that we were going to. And again, we saw that happen in sort of the early part of the time that we were in that country and in that area of operations. My baptism of fire, if you will, was I had the opportunity to go as a part of the advance party to the area that we would be in our area of operations. So at the time, the standard Marine Corps deployment was about 7 months, give or take. Some units would be a few weeks later. Sometimes you needed to be extended. You could be extended. The Army units would be there for about a year. And again, sometimes I know the Army unit that took over for us after we had been there ended up being there 18 months. And the Air Force did about 4-month rotations. So different schedule for each of the units. One of the challenges that came with that is it almost felt at times like just at the point where you really understood the area of operations that you were in, where you really had gotten the people in the area to trust what we were doing, it was time to rotate. And so one of the things that had been put in place to try to help with that transition was the unit that would sort of be the relief in place for the prior unit would send a small contingent, the advance party, in advance to understand better the area of operations that they were going to see the unit that was there before us, how they ran operations, to meet the key Iraqi civilians in our area and the Iraqi police and the Iraqi National Guard. And so I got to go in August of 2004 and to understand what the unit that was there before us was doing. On our second day there on advance party, we went out on our first operation. I was shadowing the company that we would be relieving. They were going to do a cordon and search south of Mahmudiyah in Lutifiyah. The cordon and search ended up being sort of a key operation in our entire time in Iraq. We knew going into our situation that in many respects, the Iraq conflict would not be traditional combat. There were elements of that, and certainly some of the battles that happened in Fallujah and Ramadi, and even some of the things that happened in our area of operations, you could sort of characterize it as traditional combat. But we knew more of what we were going to see would be more of what I would say is a policing or an intel action. We're understanding sort of the intelligence in the area. Who were the insurgency? How could we find them out when there were no uniforms? There was no traditional bad guy, if you will, that you would be facing. So going into that scenario, the cordon and search was a really important operation where you would go set a cordon over an entire part of a city and you would search through that entire city, because what the insurgents often would do is they would leave first thing in the morning from their homes, be gone the entire day, often for multiple days at a time, do their operations, and then return for short periods of time. So if we could lock down an entire part of the city, we found it again to be a really important tool for our overall processing of the combat there. So the first cordon search that I did was on what was called ASR Jackson. It was a main road that sort of led from Lutifiyah up to Mahmudiyah. It was in an area of Lutifiyah called Islam, and the sort of goal was that the Marine forces would set the cordon, and the Iraqi police and the Iraqi National Guard would do all the search. That was early on in sort of our desire as a coalition forces to become the support, if you will, to a growing Iraqi police force and Iraqi National Guard. As we know today, many years later, it didn't really work out that way. What we found on that day was we went and set the cordon, or the unit that was there before us, and the Iraqi police and the Iraqi National Guard basically refused to go and do the search. And Marines being Marines, it took about 15 minutes of haggling with the Iraqi police and Iraqi National Guard before the unit decided that they were going to do the search themselves. And so if you can sort of envision 50 brand new Iraqi police vehicles along the side of the road, the Marines starting to do the search of the city. And this was in a day that I remember that day, it was 117 degrees. I was still getting used to the extreme weather there with all of the gear that you wear. And about halfway through the day, I remember talking to the company commander of the unit that we would be relieving. And all of a sudden, I thought we were under mortar attack. There was a huge explosion. We all hit the deck. And as I looked up, what I thought was a mortar attack turned out to be a vehicle IED that had to try to jump off at ASR Jackson, this main road, tried to go through the Iraqi police vehicles right at where our CP had been set up. Now, the vehicle exploded on one of the Iraqi police vehicles. I have a memory that I will never forget of Iraqi policemen, about a dozen or so, jumping out of their vehicles on fire and dying. One of them who ran towards us and died about 5 to 10 feet away from me and the company commander of the unit that we were replacing. It was, for me, I remember that night getting back to the base and calling back to Camp Pendleton and talking to our leaders there about what I had experienced, because we knew rationally the environment that we were going into, but it made it much more real to see that happen. It was a great lesson for me in terms of understanding the implications of what it was that we would be doing for the next several months. In our time there, again, just to paint the picture of sort of the environment that the Golf Company was in, we had well over 100 IED attacks. 2 of them that killed 5 of our brothers. And I'll tell you, we had so many IED attacks while we were over there that you got to a point where you could tell whether an IED attack was serious or not based off of your ear got trained to understand the difference between sort of traditional one and one that was serious. You got trained to understanding just innately where our patrols were, and when a loud explosion would go off, you instantly could characterize that as Is that something we don't need to worry about, or is that something we need to worry about a lot? Our first 30 days that we were in country, when we first established a company forward operating base in Lutifiyah, we were mortared for the first 30 days. That is a feeling that you never get used to in terms of what that does to you. We did have a few direct fire action, but that didn't really happen a lot in our area of operations. I think that the insurgents there knew that in sort of a face-to-face force versus force, they were never going to be a match for our guys. But it really did become, over the course of the next several months, a bit of a game of cat and mouse in terms of developing our intel on our area of operations, understanding the trends, understanding locations where we thought the insurgents would hit, and being ready with countermeasures to take care of them when we saw that. So I'd like to talk now a little bit about trust. And Eric set this up in terms of that I was going to share some thoughts around trust. And I want to start with this quote here. Simon Sinek, who is a leadership guru, I love his quotes. I love how he talks about leadership. One of the things that he talks a lot about is trust. And, you know, he is quoted as talking about the importance of safety in trust. And, you know, you may ask, what does a combat zone have to do, anything to do with safety? And I'll tell you, and I want to use sort of an example of a author and a journalist named Sebastian Junger, who wrote a book around that was entitled Tribe. And it was around his experiences embedded with a US Army unit in the Korangal Valley in Afghanistan in 2007. And what is really interesting, he was in daily combat for over a year. He saw soldiers die. But when he got back from his time there, he found after a few months that he really missed being over there. And as he got back in touch with guys that he served with, and he started to talk about, maybe I want to write a book, he found that that's what they said as well. And he just couldn't understand at first, like, how could people miss it? How could they miss being a part? How could he miss that? And what he came to understand is he didn't miss combat. He didn't miss the casualties. What he missed was being a part of a team. He missed that feeling that what was being done there was important. He could see it as he talked to these soldiers over and over. They talked about being glad that they were home, but missing being a part of a unit where they were needed. That what they did was important, that they were part of a community, and they felt safety in that, regardless of the physical danger that they were in every minute of every day that they were there. And, you know, if I take that forward to talking about Golf Company, in my experience, what I saw about Golf Company and what I believe to be true is that every member of our company understood that they were part of a tight-knit community and that what we were doing was vitally important and that they were a part of this team. And I would contend that being in a combat zone maybe accelerate some of those feelings that you can have about that. But it doesn't just happen by accident. So what was special about Golf Company? And I have thought, I've had the opportunity, obviously, for many years to think about what was really special. And I could go on for hours talking about these guys. but I'm going to encapsulate it into 4 things in terms of what I think really drove trust in that unit. The first thing is our guys knew each other. And again, I alluded to the number of sort of brothers in our company and how our guys knew each other before they joined Golf Company, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. I'm talking about really getting to know each other. I'm talking about now 16, 17 years later. I bet if you were to talk to any number of guys in our company, you could talk to Nick Vento, BJ Ganem, Andy Wentworth, Mike McVeigh, Mick Gillitzer, Ryan Baldwin, Scott Crookton, Eric Link. You could call any number of them tonight. If you ask them in the last month, how many of the guys from Golf Company have you had interactions with? Who have you reached out to? Who have you checked up on? Chances are they'd give you an answer of somewhere between a handful to a dozen. And that's every month. That's been happening for 17 years. I would say Golf Company is like many organizations or many units that saw combat. We've had our share coming back of post-traumatic stress, and for some that hit months after getting back. For others, that's 15 years later. And our guys are always there to take care of each other, to proactively check in with each other as brothers do. And that knowing each other, I would say, engenders trust. The second thing I would highlight is this was an organization, a unit that I would say was great at the basics. I've always found in any organization I've ever been a part of that the really good ones are good at the basics. It's not the big things. It's all the small things that build up to the big things. And when you look at our organization, our inspector instructor staff, Major Jason Barrett, First Sergeant Ron Christensen, they were charged in the reserves. The I&I staff are charged with preparing a unit prior to activating. I will tell you, the day we activated, we could not have been more ready with all of the important fundamentals of what a Marine infantry unit needs to be able to do. And it was because of Major Barrett, First Sergeant Christensen. When we went to Pendleton, that 3 months of training prior to going over to Iraq, I think, was critical for honing all of the basics of the operations that we would see in our time over there. But then I would say it went way beyond that into the sort of little things. You know, one of the things we really stressed in our time over in Iraq was do the little things well. Do the things that over and over, the repetitious things that gets easy to try to cut corners. Don't cut corners. Do them well. Our guys were awesome at doing the little things. They cleaned their weapons all the time. We would patrol in small units, sometimes multiple times a day. Many of our guys got back from Iraq where they probably had, you know, upwards of 350, 400 combat patrols under their belt. It would have been easy as we got more and more experience with doing patrols to get away from doing a patrol order every time you went out on patrol. Our guys did patrol orders every time they went out on patrol. Our guard duty discipline in terms of protecting our FOB was phenomenal throughout our time there. And our guys were early for everything. If we had an operation, if we had a company level operation, if we had a platoon level operation, if we had rotating guard duty, our guys were there. They were ready to do it. And the last thing I'll sort of highlight is before every operation we went on, we would rehearse the immediate action drills. What happens if we take a casualty? What happens if not exactly what we expect to happen in the operation from the insurgency would happen? What would we do? What were the scenarios we could see? What was most likely? What was the things that we expected to see? What would we do about it? And our guys did those IAs for every single operation. So, this was a unit that was great at the basics. I think probably the biggest thing that drove trust in our organization, we had 186 incredible Marines and sailors. But if I take a subset of our unit, the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, we had a phenomenal group of NCOs. When I coached high school basketball, one of the things I really stressed in my years in coaching is that my philosophy was never to teach our kids how to run plays. I wanted to coach them to be players, because the reality is that in sports, the teams with the best players, they generally win. As coaches, we'd always try to inflate our sort of worth and our importance. But the reality is the teams with the best players, they generally win. When I look at Golf Company, our NCOs were what NCOs should be. They were ultra accountable. They were great teachers. They weren't good teachers. They were great teachers. They cared about the Marines that were under their charge. They had really sound judgment. They were forward thinking. They were loyal. They were mission oriented. They were everything that you would want in leadership by example. I mean, two quick examples to that. One of the things we did in our area of operations is wherever possible, we would do IED sweeps of the roads that we patrolled, the major arteries where there was a lot of traffic on. Wherever possible, and it wasn't always possible because of distance, but wherever possible, we did IED sweeps on foot. And if you want to see courage in action, think about a squad-sized patrol walking down two sides of a road that has been IED'd over and over and over, looking for little wires coming out of seeming trash everywhere in that country, because that might be the trigger to an improvised explosive device. And when we did these IED sweeps, every single position where there could have been the most likely area where an IED could be exploded, you would see an NCO walking in that location. Not because they had to, but exactly the opposite, because they knew they didn't have to, but they were going to set the example and absorb the potential danger. BJ Ganem was a sergeant in our unit. BJ was one of the examples of on vehicle patrols, he would always drive, and he would always put his vehicle first. Why? Because 90+% of the times, the vehicles that would get hit by an IED were the first vehicles in a patrol. Ganem went on almost every patrol that 3rd Platoon ever went on. And he was in a position in 3rd Platoon that by position, he didn't need to go on any of the patrols. But that's what our NCOs did. Other organizations have had many really good people. Lots of other Marine units have had really good people. I was lucky enough to have the best in Golf Company. I had Eastwood, I had Glennon, I had Schmidt, I had Rip, I had Rodriguez, Studnicka, I had the Moore brothers, I had Matheson, Hudasic, Maida, Hall, McGranahan, Patton, Simon, Abbott, Cornell, Dobbs, Oliver, already talked about Nick Vento. We had Coop, Lewis, Ganem, Gilly, Jackson, Hazel, Wentworth, Barnes, Murph, Link, Buddha, Wiltsey, and Sauce. Quite simply, we had the best team. What those NCOs did to make Golf Company what it is, words will never provide the real story of just how incredible our NCOs were. And I think that was a huge factor for helping to engender trust across the organization. And then I would say the last thing that the unit did is they got results, right? You know, to me, trust is about two things. It is about intent, and it is about capabilities, right? When you could trust somebody's intent, but maybe you don't trust their capabilities. You could trust somebody's capabilities. Maybe you don't trust their intent. And in Golf Company, we got results. You know, when you talk about sort of what did Golf accomplish in our time there, you know, one of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of our time there, one of the missions that we had in there was to secure a part of what was called MSR Tampa, Main Supply Route. Tampa was a highway that stretched from Kuwait City to Baghdad. It was just what it sounds like it was. It was a supply route. It was sort of the critical supply route to get supplies in for the entire coalition forces. There was only so much you can do to resupply by air for the volume that was required to keep the combat effort going in Iraq. And so we had a stretch of about 14, 15 miles of Tampa that we needed to secure. The unit that was there before us was able to keep an entire company size on that mission at all times. Because of the increased op tempo that we had and the number of missions that we had, we were able to put a platoon about a quarter of the size of the unit that was before us. And in the time that we were there, by the time we left, when we first got there, Tampa had been sort of characterized as black, which was the highest level of a security issue in the entire country. By the time we left, that had been downgraded with, again, about a quarter the size of the organization running that mission. In January of 2005, we secured the area for the first free elections in Iraq. Up until a few weeks prior to the elections, our part of the country was deemed too dangerous to have elections. We had the elections. There was one casualty, one civilian casualty in all of the areas that we were at. During our time there, we removed hundreds of insurgents from the battlefield, whether that was putting them into prison at Abu Ghraib, or whether it was killing them. But we took literally hundreds of insurgents off the battlefield. By the time we left, there were no more Sunni Shia killings in our area of operations, just in terms of basic security had been reestablished. We earned the trust of thousands of Iraqis. By the time that we left, it was just commonplace to see our patrols out conversing with Iraqi citizens, talking to them about what was going on. There was a trust factor that our guys cared about them and what was happening in the country, not just the security mission. We stood up a Lutifiyah town council in terms of a first step towards moving them towards self-rule and self-determination at a local level. You know, when we left Iraq in April of 2005, and I realize I'm biased in saying this, but we left knowing that we could not have done any better than what the unit did. And that felt incredibly good. I'd like to talk now just for a minute about something that that I feel and I believe is an important part of our society, and I call it the social contract. And it's one of, I think there are many social contracts that we make with the citizens of the United States, but one of them has to do with our veterans. I believe that when a man or woman puts their name on an enlistment contract, or they raise their hand to take the oath of office, that they enter into a contract with our country. That contract, they don't choose what's going to happen to them on that contract, but they sign up knowing that during their time serving, that they will sacrifice, and that they may sacrifice up to and including laying down their life for their country and for others. And I feel that for anybody who is willing to do that, it is important for our nation to fulfill its side of the contract. And to me, what that looks and feels like is making sure that veterans are not homeless, helping veterans from employment opportunity standpoint, taking care of the health, physical and mental, of veterans. And I believe an important part of our contract is supporting our Gold Star families. You know, I referenced a few minutes ago that we lost 5 of our brothers over in Iraq. Their names will be with us forever. Lance Corporal Ryan Catafio, Lance Corporal Brandon Ramey, Lance Corporal Shane O'Donnell, Corporal Bobby Warrens, and Staff Sergeant Chad Simon. When they died, we took an oath with each other that as long as we have breath, we will do everything we possibly can to keep their memories alive. It's incredibly important to their families. It's incredibly important to us. Since we've gotten back, we've lost Corporal Tom Schmidt, and we've lost Captain Jeremy Hoffman as well. And we will keep their names alive as well, and we will keep their memories alive as well. This is something for all of us that is as important as any oath that we've made in our lives. And in ways large and small, I've seen our guys over the course of the last 16 years hold true to that oath every day. Every day. It's something that's important to us, and I would contend that is also part of the trust factor. A number of years ago, you know, like many people, I think, coming back from a combat deployment, you think about how can you put words and how can you put memories to the incredible things that you saw. You know, for me, my time in Iraq, outside of the casualties we suffered, was the greatest thing that I've seen in my life. And to see what our guys did every single day, I cannot put into words that feeling you have for wanting to tell their story. You know, the other side of that is I would say that, you know, when you are responsible for individuals who under your charge lose their life, that is something that you never quite reconcile. And from the minute we got back, I searched for what is a way that I can tell our guys' stories And look, I know that there have been lots of stories that have been told, but this was our story. And so for many years, I talked about writing a book, and I could never sort of get my head wrapped around how do you do that all at once. And, you know, a number of years ago, my wife, in only ways that wives can do, said, look, you either need to stop talking about this or you need to do it. And so I started to put pen to paper and started a book, but did it in a different way. And so today we have an ongoing book where as I write a new chapter, I'll publish it. Over the course of the last couple of years, I've wrote 6 chapters. Each is focused on a different Marine in Golf Company. Over the course of time, I will continue to add chapters. My only regret is I doubt that I will live long enough to write 186 chapters, and every one of our Marines and sailors deserve their own chapter. But it is my way of telling the story of what is Golf Company. It's a free book. You can access it at this site, and definitely would encourage you to take a look at that and learn a little bit more about Golf Company. So look, I'd like to end, and if you would just humor me for a couple of more minutes before we get into the Q&A, and I appreciate everybody sticking with me here tonight. I'd like to talk just a minute about the power that I think we all have within us. You know, it is no secret, and I think generally I would guess that we would probably all agree with what I'm about to say. And that is that over the course of the last year, as we've gone through this global pandemic and everything that has come along with it, I think that we're seeing a country, as a country, we are suffering from a lack of trust. And again, some people may sort of challenge that. I think most people would tend to agree with it. What's interesting about it is there's a lot of finger pointing when it comes to that. Most people may agree with it. We're all pointing fingers at somebody else as to the reason why. And I actually think we're all contributing to the problem. We are all contributing to the problem. You know, I feel like there are days where as a society, we're drifting further and further away from a rational answer to this issue. And that bothers me. But I do think there is an answer, and I want to illustrate it with a story. This is a story about creating trust. It does involve a Marine, and it also involves the Veterans Museum. You know, if you go back to last summer, on the other side of the George Floyd killing, there were a number, I think everybody remembers, there were a number of protests that occurred across the country. And some of them, with them came more than just peaceful protests. I do believe most of the protests were peaceful protests. Some of them went beyond that. And in some places, there was more than just protesting. Madison was one of those cities. So there was a period of time where a number of the stores and the organizations and the structures in and around the Capitol were defaced. And the Veterans Museum was one of them. At the time, there was a group of veterans because of how special the Veterans Museum is in terms of does an incredible job of telling the stories of Wisconsin veterans. And there was a group of veterans that got together and said, what do we do with this offensive graffiti that night in and night out is being affixed to the exterior walls of the museum? And they came up with a plan that whenever graffiti goes up, the next day a group is going to get together and paint over it. That went on for about a month, 6 weeks, and there was no end in sight until one Marine decided that he was going to do something about it. And he reached out to the group of people that were doing the graffiti. And he didn't just reach out to say, stop doing it. He reached out with the intent to listen to what their goals were. He went with them to see what their realities on a day in and day out basis were. He challenged them to do things that were more productive to meet the goals that they had. He helped them to actually think about how they could organize what they were doing more effectively. And he publicly celebrated their wins. And when he did that, the graffiti stopped. His actions changed everything. In a sea of darkness, he was a light. This person knows who he is, obviously. He's most likely on this call tonight. I'm not going to reveal his name because, quite honestly, he didn't do it for publicity. He did it because in a world where almost everyone wants to complain and almost no one wants to do something to actually help, he made the simple decision to engage. And that truly is a power that we all have. And I believe that is a pathway to trust. Thank you again for having me here tonight. Thank you for all that have served this great country. Thank you to the Marines, the sailors, and the families of Golf Company. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Eric and happy to take any questions that anybody has.
That was a powerful message, Adam. Very powerful. And thank you for that presentation. That really hit home, whether you're a Marine or a soldier or a sailor. It really struck a chord, at least for me personally. We will go to the question and answer session right now. Mike, if you want to bring those questions up. Question number one, Adam, how did Golf Company deal with the different religious factions that you witnessed there in the country? And how successful do you think you were at this?
Yeah, look, it was maybe the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges we had there, you know, being in an area of operations that was 50% Sunni and 50% Shia. I'm not sure going there, we were prepared for things that would be aimed our way. I'm not sure that we were as prepared for what we saw happen between Sunni and Shia. You know, before I answer the question fully, you know, one of the things that happened while we were there is Hilla was a city south of us, very Shia dominated. And there was a SWAT patrol in Hilla that came up just south of us in Lutifiyah in our area of operations one night and just executed a bunch of Sunnis in our area of operations. And so that created a huge protest in our area, and they marched on our base. And that was one of the diciest days that I remember being there because it was, you know, there was no manual for that in terms of how you handle that. I would say for us, we really focused, we were there during, I would say, the security phase, if you will, of our time there. There wasn't a whole lot of support or stability operations, if you will, as a part of sort of the overall SASO mission. So for us, it was really important to show the people that were there that we were going to have presence. You know, one of the things I alluded to it earlier, but we had a vision that really came from our battalion commander, Mark Smith, who was an Indiana State Trooper, an incredible Marine leader and a visionary, I believe, in counterinsurgency, where his vision was, look, we need to have presence. So when Iraqis wake up in the morning, we're there. When they go to sleep at night, we're there. And they know we are there. So it's not fleeting. So they're not put in a position where they're thinking, do I have to pick the security that insurgents can provide me over potentially the security that the coalition forces can provide us. So Most of our focus in our time there was on security operations, and I think that was important. I would say we did make some progress at the very end in terms of setting up the town council to make sure that people in Lutifiyah, that they knew that their voice would be heard. But I will tell you, with that being said, what we witnessed and what we saw there are just steep historical differences that exist between the different factions in Iraq that, quite honestly, I'm not sure are, I shouldn't say are ever going to be reconciled, but it would be really hard to see those really reconciled in a company that is a country that is really factionalized.
Yeah, those historical divides certainly run for generations and centuries, and I think you might be right in your assessment there, Adam. Mike, can we move on to the next question? Question number 2, aside from trust, what was the most important lesson that you learned from your time in Iraq?
I would say the people that are working with you, when given the opportunity, will always surprise you at how much they can do. You know, our company first sergeant, David Eastwood, retired sergeant major in the Marine Corps. I learned so much from him in being over in Iraq. This was a decorated Marine who had done everything in his career. And one of the things that first sergeant was really good at, he would hold people accountable, but he would let them do their job. In Iraq, so if you think about the area of operations, our area of operations in Iraq, it would be interesting to understand our area of operations might have been as big as Dane County in terms of geography. I'd like to go back and sort of do that, make sure I'm not lying to everybody on this presentation here, but we had a large area of operations. And so the idea that through command and control that we would be able to manage the entire area of operations, that went out the window, right? Iraq was a corporal's combat. It was a sergeant, it was a squad leader combat. And you had to rely on, and every single day, our guys rose to the challenge. Often they were challenges we weren't prepared for. But I think for me, seeing that in action, I think about that all the time in terms of how important that was to see that in action. That was probably, it was I think a lesson learned. I learned every day I was there. It's a lesson learned that I reflect on all the time, thinking about our time
there. I would say a word as a former NCO myself about how nice it is to hear officers rely on their sergeants. I don't want to say you don't see that too often. I just don't think we see it often enough. But that does kind of warm my heart a little bit, as well as Sergeant Major Eastwood's, I'm quite sure. Michael, do you have that next question, please? Were all of your operations over in Iraq in urban areas, or did you get a chance to operate in bleaker places, like out in the physical desert with no sort of buildings or anything like that? And if so, if you did get to operate in those bleaker places, which do you think was the hardest to patrol?
Well, look, I think that's an easy one. If you were in Sergeant Jamie Studnicka's squad, whatever patrol he was on was the hardest one to patrol, because he always would take the hardest patrol route. We had both, Eric. In our area of operations, while some of the pictures I showed were sort of built up mount areas, if you will, more of a city setting, more of our area of operations were very rural in nature. You know, I think for different reasons, they were both hard. You know, in the built up areas, it was really hard around sort of counter IED operations, right? Because the cities were so filled with trash. Everywhere you went, it looked like trash day just hadn't come in like 6 years. And an IED could be anywhere and placed in trash. And our guys got really good at understanding what was a piece of trash, what was a wire sticking out of it that was actually an IED. So there were certain, I would say, challenges that came with that. When you talked about more of the rural times and patrols, you know, now you are talking a ton of miles. You are talking about a huge wear and tear on the body. And again, one of the things our guys really embraced was the idea of patrolling on foot. Now that wasn't always possible. Out on MSR Tampa, you know, we would do vehicular patrols multiple times a day that would span 20, 30 miles. So you're not going to do that on foot. But with that certainly came some challenges. So we certainly saw both in our time there. But having been on more than one patrol with Stud, my personal vote is the hardest patrols were always the ones with him, just given the areas he always, and maybe that was just for my benefit that we always went through the hardest terrain on his patrols, but that's what I would vote for.
Made you a better officer, right?
It made me better at something. There's no doubt about that.
Mike, do you have the next question ready? How did your, I have to move my screen here a little bit. How did your perception of the mission change from your initial introduction with SVBA ID to your turn over at the Army?
Yeah, that's a great question. Boy, that's a really good question. I think in my time there, I think even going into what we knew we were going into, I probably would have expected more traditional, however you want to call it, combat. What I think we learned in our time there was that it was, these are just my words, these aren't doctrinal words. It was more of a policing action and it was more of an intel action. And I think our guys really embraced, you know, the understanding of systems of intel. And it wasn't just about what was happening today. It was about doing a census of our entire area of operations to know who lived where, so that when you saw something out of place, that would pique your, you know, more focus on that. And so I think in our time there, really understanding the level of intelligence that had to go into it. And that's where this, you know, our unit thrived in a lot of different things. But again, when you look at the number of our guys who were law enforcement officers, who were in what they did from a civilian standpoint, they could create databases of information. We benefited from a set of skills that honestly were just ideal for what we faced. But that would probably be the biggest thing that changed for me. And again, that was knowing what we thought we were going into, but I still had this sense of we would see more traditional combat than I think what we actually faced.
Yeah, as you're answering that, I'm thinking of my time in Desert Storm, where it was, you know, a traditional, for lack of a better term, Army on Army, and trying to wrap my head around your answer about all the different little pieces that Golf Company would have had to put together with the intelligence, deciphering it, and then applying it. That would be extremely difficult. I can't even imagine how tedious and how challenging that was.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you a quick, you know, sort of snippet to give a further point to that example. On the election day in January of 2005, the first free elections in Iraq, we had a sense that our polling places would be attacked, that the insurgents would do anything they possibly can to disrupt those elections. And we created a bunch of ambush routes coming out of the various polling sites. And the one site that got attacked, they lobbed about 5 minutes worth of mortars into it was a school where the polling elections were happening. One Iraqi civilian suffered some minor injuries. Nobody else was injured. The insurgents that did that turned around, got in their vehicle, and promptly drove into an ambush and were killed. That operation was set up over 2 months worth of understanding trends and where the egress routes were. That did not happen on that day. It happened because of all the work our guys put into the day leading into that. So it's just, it was different than what I expected. Our guys adapted to it flawlessly.
We are starting to go a little bit well past our time. I do see that we have still a few more questions left. We'll press on it with at least one or two more, Adam, if that's okay with you.
Yep, I'll try to be shorter on my answers, which is maybe my biggest development need.
No, I think your answers are just fine. You're actually putting out some good information and clarifying a lot of what you wrapped up in your presentation. This question number 5, is there anything that you would do differently knowing the outcomes of your missions and your overall deployment over there? Anything you might approach differently or prepare for? I think with your last answer, though, I think some of that might be a little obvious.
Yeah, look, for me, it was, I would have done something differently so that we didn't lose our guys. I mean, that's just the honest answer. We were, the Marine Corps is always going to be mission first. It's a really important component of what Marines do. We're always going to be mission first. And I believe that we achieved our mission in our time there. That's just my opinion. And I think it's backed by fact and action. But there isn't a day that goes by when I don't think about the guys that we lost. And ultimately, they were in my company. And ultimately, the operations that they were on was because of me. So if I could do anything, if I had a do-over, which obviously we do not get in this world, that is probably the only thing in my life I'll never be able to reconcile. But that's the honest truth.
Mike, we'll at least go to one more question, I think. Question number 6, Adam, in your opinion, what sets Golf Company reservists apart from other active duty counterparts? And is this a good or bad thing?
Yeah, look, I'll keep this one short because I think I highlighted some of this during the presentation. Again, I loved every minute of my time on active duty. The opportunity to bring guys together that had come from very different walks of life and meld them into a fighting unit is just special. On the reserve side, though, if you think about the idea of 171 guys coming from the same state, 6 sets of brothers. Now, while that gave First Sergeant and myself some sleepless nights as we put together helo sticks and stuff like that and trying to separate brothers and all that sort of stuff, the bonds that we had in terms of understanding each other, the set of skills that we had in terms of law enforcement, firefighters, EMT, carpenters, plumbers, the stuff that we need. My radio operator had a PhD. More than once, other units would come into our CP and they would start talking to him as if he was the company commander, which quite honestly, from an intelligence standpoint, he was only about 20 times more smart than I was. So those skill sets, to me, you certainly see incredible skill sets in the active duty, but in the active duty, most individuals have joined straight out of high school or out of college, and that's what they know. Our guys had different experiences, different careers, different things that they brought to the table that just, I would say, amplified our effectiveness by many, many factors in terms of what they brought to the table. I saw that to be the difference. And now years later, the closeness that our guys have, I'd like to think it would still be there even if we lived all across, but the ability to get 20 guys together in Madison on a night just like that. And what they do to stay connected with each other and to take care of each other is just an incredible differentiator.
That's amazing that you guys still have that closeness after all this time. You hear about it a lot, but to hear about it firsthand, and we could see a lot of those guys, in this call right now, and I just find that incredible, and it makes me happy, even as a soldier, to hear about Marines, coming together and having that bond. I think we have one more question, Adam, and I think we'll go ahead and get to that right now. Last question, first impressions of setting up another forward operating base.
Yeah, that's probably referencing the FOB we set up in Lutifiyah, because that's probably a day that none of our guys will forget in terms of, in our time there. I think I alluded to it earlier. In Lutifiyah, there had been no permanent presence set up there prior to us getting there, so we had to go and set that up. The minute the insurgents saw us getting in there and that we were going to actually set up a base, mortars started raining. We had RPG attack. They did not want us to stay there. It was, a day I still learn details about it from our guys, from their point of view, and what happened on that day. It's if we ever need to do it again, I guess we have the skill set, but luckily we most likely will never have to do that again.
Well, I hope you don't either, Adam. And I just want to thank you for your time tonight, for sharing your thoughts, your presentation, and your experiences, and as well, in kind of a roundabout way, introducing us to some of the members of Golf Company too. Very powerful presentation tonight, and I'm sure I'm not speaking for myself. It really hit home for me. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out to our mess night this evening. We appreciate everybody attending and supporting the museum and supporting Adam and supporting the United States Marines as well. We do have many other events coming up. We have a curator conversation next Tuesday where our archivist, Mr. Russell Horton, is going to be talking about how to research your World War II family members from a genealogy perspective. And then we also have a movie night discussion coming up next Friday, where we're going to be talking about the movie A Bridge on the River Kwai. So if you are interested in any of those or other events from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, as we said in the beginning of the program, you can always find our event listings on our website, wizvetsmuseum.com. Michael Olson has put that website up there for everybody. So we look forward to seeing, hopefully, many of you at our other events. And Adam, once again, thank you so much for being with us tonight and for sharing all your information, your thoughts, your emotions, and the rest of Golf Company with us too. We really appreciate it, and we would definitely love to have you back again for another event in the future.
Anytime. Thank you very much, and thank you for all that the museum does for our veterans.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure indeed, Adam. And again, everybody, thank you so much. And we hope to see you at some of our other events and even possibly our next mess night coming up in August. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.